Very good. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to sit with the editorial board for the Citizens Voice and once again say why I actually want to run for this county controller position when I'm a sitting county council member currently. There's some serious problems with the county on performance and management issues, as well as some financial, but not as dire, I would say, as the performance side and management side. As most people are keenly aware in the county, we're losing staff in the Bureau of Elections on a regular basis. We have issues with children and youth. We have some concerns with just general operations of the county since we've gone with home rule in 2012. And as a person who's instrumental in making the county move to that direction of home rule, it's really a personal thing for me, as well as the fight for the people of the county for good government. The concern that I have is home rule is a better form of government, no question about it, than county commissioner form. I still believe that. I believed it when we started it in 2012. However, I think we have some concerns that need to be addressed on the performance side and managerial side to make it a better government all the way around. And as the controller, that's one of the things that I want to participate in, is to make the government a better government, make it a good government for the people, make it a government that everybody can be proud of, instead of every time the newspaper opens, it's another issue for the county that is, not being run properly, or somebody's getting slammed in the newspaper for not doing their job, whether it be for sunshine law violation or for any other things that we've noticed in the paper. And I think the controller plays a very vital part in that equation. The charter clearly states that he's the independent watchdog over fiscal and management activities, which is really important. That's a really important phrase that's in our charter. They're not only a financial person that looks at audits and looks at financial spending and looks to make sure people are doing the accounting properly, but it's a management activity as well. So we get to go in and look and see if, there is a policy in place, if there is a procedure in place. Is the procedure working? Is it not working? How could we help in some way to identify those areas and pass them off to the manager, and have the manager analyze those recommendations and try to make the county a better government? And that's basically the job of the controller in a nutshell. So that's why I think I could do better for the people of Luzerne County by being the controller. I think I've made great strides as a county council member. I've identified some things there, and I'm working hard to try and be the legislative side of the government. But the controller is a better person to identify. And I think I have the tenacity. I certainly think I have the knowledge and the ability to do that and benefit the people.
Maybe just comment a little bit on, the performance of Michelle Bednar, who you are running against in November 2nd. Do you think that she's paying much attention to the management end of the job as you've laid it out?
No, I don't. And if you look at the audits that have been done the past 8 years, most of the audits that have been done were financial audits of tax collectors. They've been financial audits of magistrates, financial audits of, she's done some real estate audits. We have a $5 registration fee that's going to expire at the end of the year, which is critical to get people their money back that they paid double on that they shouldn't. Thanks to the Citizens Voice for identifying that back a year ago, that the state was never notified, which is another procedural issue. But I don't think the controller currently that's there is paying a lot of attention to procedural stuff. And I don't know if it's because she doesn't have the staff, or whether it's because she just doesn't feel that that's as important as the financial side. But clearly, I think the downfall of this government right now currently is the fact that we have nobody overlooking and overseeing and identifying problems in managerial activities.
Now, you talked about the language in the charter that mentions management. What is the controller's kind of ability or power to enforce things? Or is there a power, or is it just an advisory opinion that the controller can issue?
Yeah, and that's an important point, Dave, that the charter does not give the controller quote unquote power to fix anything. It is an advisory role in that capacity, but a strong advisory role, for lack of we can't obviously go into the manager and say, you must do this. But as the controller, we can certainly recommend it and continue to put the findings in, much like the Auditor General does in the state of Pennsylvania. He identifies items as well, and he has no authority to make them do anything. But he can certainly recommend strongly that these policies and procedures be put in place, and the benefit for that to happen, and try and help them along to make that goal a reality. I think that's the problem that we have. One of the issues in the charter is that the controller actually doesn't have power that they used to have in the commissioner form, where they were actually able to stop a payment. Currently, I don't see any RFPs or bid process being done properly in the county in purchasing, which is a procedural management issue. And I think the controller should be somebody who's identifying those things to make sure that we're purchasing things at the best price. That doesn't seem to be happening either. So it is an advisory role, but I think the power of the controller, being the independent watchdog as well as an independent elected official, carries a lot of power just by the nature of the job. And I think people would pay attention to recommendations, because I don't think anybody would not, if it's going to be for the betterment of the people.
Okay. Aside from the purchasing issues you mentioned, obviously you've been on the council, so you have a pretty good idea of the inner workings of the courthouse. What kind of areas would you be looking at, and what kind of recommendations would you be considering?
Well, as I said, the first year, if I'm fortunate enough to be in the office of controller, the first year I'd spend strictly identifying and working on policy and procedure areas. I won't even probably be looking at much financial the very first year, because I think the current controller has done, I won't say a fabulous job, but she certainly has identified financial areas in her reign of 8 years. But I think the biggest issue right now that we have to tackle is the performance area. So the first year, I'd probably be looking at the most critical areas. Obviously, the Bureau of Elections is one area that needs to be taken a look at to make sure, see why people are leaving. And to the acting manager's credit, at least we're starting to do documentation and try and put policy and procedure in. But before, as everybody knows, there was no policy and there was no procedure in that office. Everybody pretty much did it because they knew how to do it. And that's why we've been having problems in that office. So there's that particular office needs to be looked at. Real estate is another area that we've seen over the past where we've had issues with policy and procedure, where we really don't identify the proper way to handle repository properties, how to handle sale of property. And now, and as we've seen in the last couple of council meetings, we're having problems with people that are, being made to go get assessments on their property, appraisals, and then they turn around and they bring the appraisal in, and now the council doesn't want to accept their appraisal. So that's because we don't have a policy and procedure. And those are the type of things that I've identified as council member that I'll continue to work on as a controller, because I'll have the power, because the charter gives us the ability to go in and actually get that information. Council has to go through the manager to get that information. So it's a little bit slower process.
Okay. Eric, Buff?
Walter, I remember you had suggested the county controller would be a good person to investigate the situation with Mackey at the jail. That was kind of like the last ditch attempt to further that investigation, and you were the one who suggested that, if I recall correctly. There were people who didn't really understand why that would be a good topic for the controller to investigate, or why the controller would be a good person to investigate it. Can you expound on why you think the controller would have been fit to investigate that situation?
Sure. I think the reason that, as a councilman, I recommended that is because the charter gives the controller unfettered access to all documents and everything that we need to do I don't want to use the word investigation, but certainly do a policy procedure to see why that happened. As we all seen some parts of that video, there seems to be some video that was released that shows that, was there a policy that says this is how you handle the situation, or were these corrections officers just basically a fight and flight type of situation where you're in a situation where you just have to control somebody and there's no regard for policy and procedure? So that's why I think the controller could have stepped in and said, okay, so what was the reason why he was actually brought out of the cell and brought into the holding cell downstairs, and find out if the procedure was followed. Why was the people who were in management idly standing by and not intervening when they saw, either, if, in my opinion, whether it was excessive force or not, I don't know. But certainly I would have thought with the leadership that was standing around, they would have stepped in and said, maybe we need to take a look and see what's going on here. But we saw many, I think there was two leadership people standing there, and I didn't see them intervene in anything. So I think the controller could easily have gone in and reviewed the policy procedure, see what situation they were in, and if there was a policy and procedure to identify how they handle that. And much like we do with policemen, they need to do a review to find out if there wasn't, then maybe there should be, and then give better training and proceed that way. Because clearly, I don't know if they followed a procedure or not. I don't believe they have one. I think the only procedure they follow is what's guided to them by the state. And, again, corrections officers have a very difficult job, and they're under a lot of stress a lot of the time. So it's imperative that we get proper training and make sure that policy and procedures are followed.
Buff, you have a question?
Yeah, Walter, with, the latest children and youth scandal, there was a known problem where the child line tips weren't being followed. In retrospect, should there have been some oversight either from the manager, controller, or the council as to how those numbers dramatically overnight decreased?
I really believe, quite honestly, Buff, that I think the issue with children and youth has been an ongoing issue. Even when I was in controller in 2010, we had issues over at the Children and Youth Office. And I think the controller, obviously in the charter, has the ability to check any office, agency, authority, board, or commission. And that would have been one of the things that had, I think there was a couple breakdowns with children and youth. We have an ethics code that wasn't utilized. That was the whole point of the ethics code, was so people in management or people in employees could report a problem. That didn't happen. And I, as controller, would like to know why the employees didn't use the ethics commission to complain if they saw something going on that they didn't feel was appropriate. That's the first issue. The second issue is clearly that had we had an ethics commission that actually does work, which ours currently does not, maybe that would have been the heads up to people to go in, and the controller could have went in. I can't believe that we have that tip hotline for the controller's office and nobody called the controller's office saying, hey, I see some stuff going on here in children and youth that I don't think is appropriate. So I think it's a policy issue. The controller could have clearly went in there and looked at those forms and said, how did you become compliant so quickly? The Citizen's Voice, I believe, is the newspaper that identified the problem. At that moment, when that was identified in 2017, if I was in the controller's office, I would have got a hold of the reporter or somebody from your newspaper and said, you need to brief me and tell me what you've heard. And then I would have went in there with my staff and pulled the paperwork out and took a look around to see if they are documenting stuff from Childline. Are they helping these children, or are they not? Or are they just zeroing out the forms and not doing anything for the problem children and taking care of only the better ones? So I think it's clearly a controller issue in the children and youth that could have been possibly avoided or at least corrected before it got worse. And I think it's very unfortunate that we had all these cases that clearly were identified in 2017 by your newspaper, and they said there was problems, and nobody thought it was appropriate to even go in and look around and say why. When the Times Leader came in at one point, when I was controller, I think it was Times Leader, it might have been the Citizen's Voice, and identified a problem that was going on with the courts. If you remember, where people were double and triple billing the courts, the newspaper told me about it, and I identified it, and I went out and did an investigation to find out what happened. And we did identify that. And we pulled the checks and we did all the paperwork to find out what actually happened with that double billing of the courts, and why some attorneys were doing that. And that's an important role of the controller, because he or she is the only elected official in this county who is independent. We only have a county council and a district attorney other than the county controller. So people in this county have absolutely no other outlet to complain and get action on anything if they can't go to the controller, who's the independent person. And I've demonstrated over the years that, If you tell me there's something going on, I will do the investigation to verify whether it's actually true or not. And if it's true, then we will do our best to make it better. Much like we did with Prison Gate when we had the Food Gate issue going on. Those type of things need to be reported because it happens, and it may happen innocently or it may be on purpose. But if nobody takes the initiative to find out, it's not going to get any better. It's just going to get worse. So that's why it's important to have an independent, aggressive controller.
Okay. Now, Walter, obviously your last stint as controller did not end well.
Right.
In the charges against you in the recording issue. And, you got to think that there are some voters out there who remember that and say,
sure,
well, maybe we're reluctant to put Walter back in that position. So how do you address that?
Well, quite honestly, Dave, I address it very simply. When that all happened, I think the people of this county recognized what happened. I did not record people on purpose to use it against them. I recorded it from my notes. That was clearly identified in the case. It was an issue that I was instructed to do that on several occasions, and I did it. And they obviously denied that actually did happen. But at the end of the day, I did not record people on purpose. I didn't nefariously go out there and say, I'm going to record people and use it against them. I used it for my own notes. I was doing it innocently, thinking that was a permissible thing. I never conferred with my solicitor. And the reason I didn't is because I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. Had I asked my solicitor and he told me that, I certainly wouldn't have never done it. But, the voters understand. I think the people of this county understand that, I'm the type of guy that will do, what, if I have to do an investigation, I will do the investigation and I will stand by the people. I will fight for the people 100%, as I did last night at the council meetings for the budget being put up online. I think it's imperative that government is transparent, and this ability to record people was done innocently on my part, but you know what? It was a violation. They identified it as a violation. I accepted the fact that, I did not tell Mr. Cheval I was recording the call. That's my bad. I should have done that. Had I known the law clearly, I would have never done it that way. And it was an innocent mistake on my part, but clearly a crime either way. And I think the people recognize that, and they know me better than that. I think people of this county certainly understand what I'm about, what my character is about, and they certainly understand why I do the things that I do. And it's not to be, and I think I will be successful because people do recognize that. So I don't think it's something that should be held against me. I obviously paid my fine. I did the time I was supposed to do. And, it was an innocent mistake on my part, but a violation of the law on the legal side. And it was my stupid mistake, for lack of a better term, and certainly be smarter in the future. And definitely would never do something like that or anything of that nature without, making sure that it's something that I'm allowed to do. But I think it's unfortunate that, I allowed a job that I love to do get taken away from me because of my stupid mistake. And that's strictly on me.
Okay. What you're laying out here today is really a much more aggressive approach to running that controller's office. What would you anticipate would kind of be the reaction, not only from the council, but the manager, whoever that might end up being, and department heads?
Well, I'm saying it's an aggressive approach, but it's the approach that the charter mandates the controller to do. Whether you want to say it's aggressive or not, I think I have an obligation to follow the charter in that section that says the job of the controller is to do this. And the job of the controller says to make sure that people are in compliance, to make sure that the government is following the guidelines as outlined in the charter. And that is an aggressive stance. But, that's what the charter mandates. And in order to have good government, you have to have oversight. You just have to have oversight. You can't let 11 members of council who may be in the majority or not, and a manager who's not elected, do whatever they want to do without any oversight. And that's why we put the controller in there to do that type of oversight, not be an auditor or a financial person who writes checks like it used to be. The controller is supposed to be aggressive. That's why in the language of the charter, It clearly says they're a watchdog. That language is pretty strong language in the charter. So if the charter is saying you're a watchdog, they're not saying that you're just supposed to go in there and, take a look around. The auditor of Pennsylvania is a watchdog. They're supposed to look at policy procedure, make sure the government spending is properly handled, make sure the financial stuff is being done right. It is an aggressive position, but it needs to be aggressive if we're going to be accountable and have good government.
Walter, you mentioned the Ethics Commission not really being much of a force in this government. Now I have to refresh my memory. Is the controller involved in that commission at all? And is there something the controller can do to make that to give that body some more bite?
Well, I think one of the problems that's with the Ethics Commission is the council has watered down the intent of the Ethics Commission. They've made it more of a tribunal rather than an outlet for people to voice complaints, make suggestions. And that's why when I was in the controller's office, I put in the complaint hotline. I mean, Ms. Bednar is saying that she's the one that put that in. That's not true. When I was in the office, I put a complaint hotline in. It wasn't called Cecil, but it was a complaint hotline nonetheless that people could call anonymously and tell the controller if they had an issue. The problem that we have with the Ethics Commission now, and the controller sits on that commission, is the controller needs to voice an opinion and say, we should be taking anonymous complaints. We should be taking people to call on the phone and say, hey, there's a problem in a certain part of the county that you need to look at. Whether that should be the extent of it. But we don't do that with the Ethics Commission. And that's why Kids for Cash became so rampant in the county, was because people were afraid of their jobs, so they couldn't say anything. And we have the same thing going on at Children and Youth right now, where people knew what was going on over there, but didn't want to say anything because they were afraid of their jobs. That should never be the case. And it shouldn't be only in government. It should be anywhere. If you're in a place like you're working and you see something going on, you should never be afraid to speak out and say, something's going on here. I need you to take a look at it for fear of retaliation or losing your job. And now we have an ethics commission that basically they get together. They have two attorneys analyze a case. The attorneys say, there's nothing there. And it goes away. And so people are now, as you see, there's no complaints filed. People will not file complaints because they feel it's just a waste of time. And that was not the intent of that commission. That commission was supposed to be the place where everybody went to complain. And it's become a place where nobody will go to complain because they're identified, they're brought in and scrutinized, they have no legal representation. And it's become a place where people are afraid to say anything. And that needs to be fixed. That needs to be a place where people can go and sit down, speak to people confidentially, send a paperwork in confidentially, and then get an investigation. That's why you have the controller on there. That's why you have the DA on there. And that's why you have the county manager on there. And so we can get results from people's complaints and fix those things. And right now we don't have that.
And if I remember correctly, the former election bureau had an ethics problem, which I think was handled on the state level, but not on the county level. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yep. And that's exactly another issue is what we had the issue with Marissa, where she supposedly took those junkets and got paid. And it was a pay to play type of kickback scheme or whatever they wanted to call it. There were situations there where the controller could have got in there and taken a look at that had we had a place to complain, and they could have expanded on it. But consequently, they called in outside, they called in somebody from the outside. Same with Troutman Pepper. I mean, Troutman Pepper shouldn't be doing an investigation in Children and Youth. The controller should be doing that. And then if the controller feels it's necessary, let the controller call somebody in, or the manager should have went to the controller's office and said, hey, I would like you to get somebody in here to do an investigation on Children and Youth. And the controller could have went out and hired an attorney of her choice or my choice, because it just looks like we're playing all the time. We're playing cover up. And so the manager hires somebody to oversee the same process that he was overseeing. The people just can see right through that type of thing. And that's why I feel that it's important to use the controller for those investigations. The manager clearly could have went to the controller and said, look, I don't like what happened in Children and Youth. I want you to go out as the independent elected official. I want you to find an attorney or whatever you feel is necessary to do that investigation. And I want it taken care of so we get a clear answer as to what happened over there. And that way it doesn't appear that we're playing cover up. whether we are or we aren't, the appearance is, the appearance of impropriety in this county is very, very rampant. And people are very skeptical from the election process all the way to children and youth. And I think that's the issue that we have to be careful of.
Walter, I want to be very clear on what you're saying in terms of the investigatory powers of the controller, because, for instance, in elections, there are a million questions and controversies going on there. But as far as I know, there are no accusations that anybody misappropriated funds or misused funds or anything along those lines. It's all how the process worked out in the elections process, and the things that were done is what the complaints are about. So if you had a situation in which there were no issues involved with money, handling of money, no accusations of anybody doing anything improper with money, would you still feel that it was within the purview of the controller to investigate that situation?
Well, if it didn't have to do with money, but it had to do with for instance, on the election machine issue where they said the Democratic ballot was up, or they said Democratic ballot on the front page. That is something that's a management problem that the controller could have went in to find out what happened there. Why did that happen? What are we doing in the future to fix it so it doesn't happen again? What policy do we have in place that made that happen? Or, those type of investigations are of the controller's purview. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be something as simple as, they're not doing something that needs to have a policy for it. And the controller can go in and say, have you sat down with the manager? Do you have a policy and procedure to do your job? And if they don't, then maybe that's why that happened. Do we check every single machine before it goes out? Not every single machine, but every single precinct. My issue with the election board is that Democratic ballot, had somebody opened up the machines and actually tested the ballot before it went out, would have never happened. And so why did that not happen? Was it a mistake because Dominion programmed that machine to put that on there by mistake, or was that put on there because somebody said we need the right Democratic ballot on there? These questions can be answered by the controller, and very easily, and that's not done. And so consequently, we end up going out and getting somebody else to do the same work that we hire people in the county to do. And that's the role of the controller. And it's a very aggressive role, as Dave said. The controller, it's a very aggressive office. It's somebody who has to make sure that if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, it's addressed by the controller, because they're the independent one. And they're the ones who have to identify and give that stuff to the manager and work hand in hand with the manager. I don't have a problem, taking stuff into the manager and saying, this is what we found. How about helping us understand why that happened and tell us how you could fix it for the betterment of this county? That is a conversation that needs to happen between the controller and the manager, because he or she does not know everything that's going on in this county. It's impossible for them to know that. And if we identify something in the controller's office, she may not even be aware of. And if we identify it and give it to her and she fixes it, everybody's a winner for that.
I recall, Walter, that you had some issues way back when you were controller about the county's vehicle policy and the amount of vehicles the county had at that time. Right. Has anybody ever followed up on that? And do you know what the status of that situation is?
No, and that's one of the things, to Dave's point about what the controller currently is doing now is financial audits, is we're missing a lot of the other stuff that goes on in the county that's really important. That vehicle thing with the gas cards was really important, and that's gone to the wayside. A lot of those things I don't know if they're still following a gas card policy. I don't believe she's audited the Prothonotary's office, where we found money actually stolen and people were making restitution. I don't know if we've looked at that financial area, which is millions of dollars coming in through the Prothonotary's office. I don't know if we're looking at the sheriff's office with real estate and sheriff sales and all that. All that stuff was done as part of a process back when the controller was in the 3-commissioner form. It's not being done currently by this controller. And those are important areas of the county. Nobody's looking at payroll. I was the one that identified we're not even using a time clock, and I'm the guy who works on council. So I just don't feel, that it's working well for the controller not to do the stuff that they're supposed to be doing. So, that whole thing with the time clock system is very egregious to me as a council member, and even more egregious to me as a former controller. I was the one that identified people who were actually punching people in and out. And now we're not even using them at all. Now we're back to the same way we used to do with the county commissioners, where we have a timekeeper in the office who takes time and submits it to somebody, and they put it into Kronos, and then Kronos turns it over into payroll. There's no accountability there. We don't know who's coming into work and who's not. And people are walking out the door with $12,000, $13,000 buyouts, and nobody even knows if they took time off or not, because there is no time clock system. And even Bob Lott, when he was the manager, punched in and out. When Dave became the manager, they decided that wasn't going to happen anymore. So we have some serious problems in managerial and procedural policy in this county that the controller needs to take a look at and bring it to the attention of the manager so they can fix it. And with a new manager coming in, I think it's even more important to have a good controller that can help the new manager identify these things so they can fix those problems.
So you're saying that the time clocks that were installed in all the offices aren't being used?
No, they are not. They are not being used. And
well,
I asked
that part of that was a COVID thing, though, right?
Yeah, sure, it's a COVID thing, but there's a way to fix the COVID thing, and it could have been fixed. We're into COVID over a year and a half, so if we're not going to fix it after a year and a half, I don't think we're going to fix it. So if you have a problem with somebody sticking their finger in the cradle because it's not clean and we're afraid they'll get COVID, I understand that's a valid concern. So what is your answer to fix that? How about a policy that says everybody who's a county employee has to use their security badge to get in the building? That would be a check and balance against the employee. Now we can look at the security log in and log out to be sure that they actually were here or were not here. But we don't even do that. We don't have a policy that says people have to use their badge to get in the building. So there is no record of anybody being in the county office at any given time other than some timekeeper who says, oh, geez, I know this guy. I'm just going to mark him in for the day. I don't know if that happens, but it clearly could. Right now, there's absolutely no check and balance on that. And I brought it up to the manager, and I get, crickets. So
if I remember correctly, before COVID, the court employees, I believe the judiciary said that the time clocks don't apply to court employees and they weren't going to use them. Is that correct? And is there anything that you as controller could do about that?
Well, one of the things that I have a problem with a lot of things that go on in the county is they need to read the charter that says clearly the manager is responsible for the entire county. The judiciary is only separate in the way they run the judiciary. They're not separate in their ways they follow the county policies and procedures. They are not. The charter says the manager is responsible for that. So somebody along the way needs to identify that if in fact the judiciary wants to do that separately, they can certainly do it separately, but they need to follow the same policy and procedure that everybody else in the county does. So if you have people that are off site that don't have a time clock to punch in, then we need to give them provisions to log in through computer, as I do at my job. I don't punch in or punch out. I use a computer to log in. So they could do the same. But the ability for us to allow somebody to just come to work at any time they want and just put down that they came there at 8:30 and went home at 4 o'clock is just not accountable to the people that pay the bills. And that's what the issue is, and the same with the court's budget. The court sets their budget, but as you recognize back when in commissioner days, the commissioners told them they weren't going to get that kind of money, and they ended up in court over it. But they are a separate branch of government, but they are not separate in accountability to the county, and that's what the controller is responsible for. In fact, the section of the charter that I'm looking at right here, it even says the controller is supposed to look at and or related audits of any county division, department, bureau, office, agency, authority, board, commission, elected office, or the judiciary. So the controller has to look at the Office of Court Administration, administrative units. They should be, the controller is responsible to look at all of those things, policies and procedures, and bring them to the attention of the manager if they're in any way not to the benefit of good government and the rule of the charter.